August 15th, 2026. It is Saturday evening at the southern end of Hawaii Island, and in the town of Naalehu, the rain has been falling for hours at 3 to 5 inches every hour. Above the town, gulches that are normally dry gullies you could step across are carrying water down off the volcano toward the sea. Offshore, a hurricane named Lala is moving past the coast. Its maximum sustained winds are 75 miles per hour, which makes it a Category 1, the weakest hurricane there is. It is already falling apart. By Sunday morning, it will not be a hurricane at all. And here is the detail this entire story turns on. Lala never made landfall. There's no point on any map where the center of that storm crossed the coastline. It went past. That night, 2 occupied homes go off their foundations. Roughly 100 houses are damaged or destroyed. 63,000 customers on that island lose power on an electrical grid connected to nothing. Not to the mainland, not to the next island over. There is no convoy of utility trucks anywhere on Earth that can drive to it. The number that matters here is not how strong that storm was. It is how weak it was. This is the story of the one American state that nobody can reach. To understand what happened on that island, you have to go back to the middle of the week, before there was a storm worth naming, when the only thing sitting off the southeast approach to the Hawaiian chain was a tropical system that most people expected to fall apart. That is usually what happens. The Central Pacific is a graveyard for storms aimed at Hawaii. The islands are 8 specks in an ocean that covers a third of the planet, and the odds of a cyclone finding them are small enough that most residents have spent their whole lives watching systems curve away, weaken, or simply dissolve a few hundred miles out. Warnings go up. Bottled water sells out. And then, almost always, nothing happens. By Thursday, August 13th, 2026, the forecasters were not using the language of nothing happening. The Central Pacific Hurricane Center was describing life-threatening rainfall and surf ahead of the system's closest approach. And they were noting something that had not been true in a very long time, that if this storm came ashore, it would be the first hurricane landfall in the state of Hawaii in more than 30 years. That single fact deserves to be sat with for a moment, because it explains almost everything that followed. Nearly 34 years had passed since a hurricane had actually made landfall in Hawaii. An entire generation had grown up in those islands without ever experiencing one. People who were small children the last time it happened were now approaching 50. Everyone who moved to the state after 1992, and hundreds of thousands did, had never seen it. A 34-year gap is not a run of good luck. It is an erosion. It removes the memory of what a hurricane does to a place that cannot be reached by road. The system organized faster than the pattern suggested it should. By Friday, it had a name, Lala. And by Friday night, it had crossed the line from tropical storm into hurricane with maximum sustained winds of 75 miles per hour. 75 miles per hour is the threshold. It is the exact number at which a tropical storm becomes a Category 1 hurricane, which makes Lala the weakest possible version of the thing it had become. On the scale that people use to measure fear, it barely registered. A Category 1 is the storm that gets described as manageable. On Saturday, August 15th, Lala tracked past the southeast coast of Hawaii Island. Past, not into. This is the detail that the entire story turns on, and it was reported carelessly at the time, so it is worth being precise. Lala did not make an official landfall. There is no point on any map where the center of that hurricane crossed the coastline. It came close enough to deliver hurricane conditions onto land, and then it kept going, and by Sunday, it had weakened back into a tropical storm and was moving away to the northwest. So the storm that hit Hawaii Island on August 15th was a minimum-strength hurricane that stayed offshore. Hold on to that, because everything that follows happened anyway. The rain started before the wind mattered, and it did not behave like rain. By Saturday afternoon, the National Weather Service was measuring rainfall rates on the Big Island of 3 to 5 inches per hour. 3 inches in an hour is the kind of number that shuts down a city on the mainland. 5 inches in an hour is a number that most drainage systems on Earth are not built to move. The forecasters started revising upward while the event was still running. The maximum storm total forecast had been 25 inches. During Saturday, it was raised to 30 and then to 35. At Lapahoho, on the island's northern coast, the final measurement across August 14th to 16th came to 43.54 inches. More than 31 of those inches fell inside a single 24-hour period. It is difficult to hold a number like that. 31 inches of rain in one day is more than the annual rainfall of most of the American West. It is more than Seattle receives in a year. It fell on one island in one day from a storm that never came ashore and was already being downgraded, and it did not fall onto flat ground. Hawaii Island rises from sea level to nearly 14,000 feet in a horizontal distance of about 30 miles. There is no gentle coastal plain. The land goes up hard and fast, almost immediately. When a storm pushes moist tropical air against terrain like that, the air has nowhere to go but up. As it climbs, it cools, and cooling air cannot hold the water it was carrying, so it lets go. Meteorologists call this orographic enhancement, and it is the reason parts of that island chain are among the wettest places measured anywhere on the planet. It also means the same storm produces wildly different outcomes depending on where it passes. Over open ocean, Lala was a modest system. Pressed against the flank of a volcano, it became a machine for converting a passing hurricane into a wall of water. Then there is the second half of the geography, which is drainage. Water that falls on a steep volcanic slope does not spread out, because there is no floodplain to spread into. There are gulches, narrow channels cut straight down the mountainside toward the sea. In dry weather, most of them are gullies you could step across without thinking about it. They do not fill gradually, they deliver. On Saturday evening, in the dark, the National Weather Service office in Honolulu issued a flash flood emergency for Naalehu, in the Kau district at the southern end of the island. A flash flood emergency is not a warning. It is the highest tier product the Weather Service has for flooding, reserved for situations where there is a severe and immediate threat to human life. It is not issued for water in the streets. It is issued when the office believes people are about to die. Naalehu is the southernmost town in the United States. It sits at the bottom of the island, rural and small, with the nearest hospital a long drive along a coastal road, in a district where the gulches above town run straight down from the volcano. That night, at least 2 occupied homes went off their foundations. Hawaii County Mayor Kimo Alameda confirmed it publicly while it was still happening, that several occupied homes may have been swept off their foundations in the Naalehu and Waiheno areas, and that a search and rescue mission was underway. The mission was a joint operation drawing on county resources, the Hawaii National Guard, and the United States Coast Guard, working in the dark, in 3 to 5 inches of rain an hour, in terrain where the roads themselves were part of the problem. Across the southern end of the island, roughly 100 homes were destroyed or damaged. 1 person was killed in a vehicle crash. It is worth stating plainly what the emergency managers were dealing with, because it defines the shape of the risk. They were not fighting wind. A Category 1 that stays offshore does not flatten towns. They were fighting water arriving faster than any surface on that island could absorb it, at night, in a district that is hard to reach on a good day. The other number moved in a way that should be uncomfortable for anyone who watched it in real time. On Saturday afternoon, Hawaiian Electric was reporting somewhere over 40,000 customers without power. By Saturday evening, the figure had roughly doubled to more than 88,000 statewide, approximately 63,270 on Hawaii Island, 15,260 in Maui County, and 9,500 on Oahu. The damage curve was still climbing while the storm itself was being downgraded. That is the part worth noticing. The public narrative had already moved to relief. Lala is weakening, Lala is leaving. At the same moment, the actual harm on the ground was doubling. The utility told customers on Hawaii Island and in Maui County to expect to remain without power at least overnight, and warned of possible extended outages beyond that. Damage assessments had to happen before repairs could begin, and the assessments themselves had to wait for conditions that would let crews into the terrain. Among the assets requiring assessment was the Hamakua transmission corridor on the island's northeast side, roughly 42 miles of line strung through country that is difficult to reach in fair weather, and effectively unreachable in the middle of a flash flood emergency. By Sunday, about 240 members of the Hawaii National Guard had been deployed to assist. And here is where the story stops being about a storm. When a hurricane knocks out power in Florida, something happens within hours that almost nobody thinks about, because it is so routine that it has become invisible. Convoys of utility trucks start driving. They come from Georgia, from the Carolinas, from Tennessee, from Ohio. Mutual aid agreements move thousands of linemen, bucket trucks, poles, and transformers toward the damage across a continent-sized road network. And the reason a major American city can go from dark to lit in a week is that the rest of the country can physically drive to it. Hawaii has no version of that. The islands are not grid interconnected, not to the mainland, and not even to each other. There is no undersea transmission tie between Oahu and Hawaii Island. Each island runs its own separate, self-contained electrical system, generating and distributing its own power with no ability to import a single watt from anywhere. The consequence is total. Every repair crew that will work on that island after a storm is either already standing on it when the storm arrives, or has to be flown or shipped in. Every replacement pole, every transformer, every spool of conductor, every generator, all of it comes across an ocean, on a schedule set by ports and airfields that the same storm just finished damaging. There is no convoy. There is no rest of the country that can drive to it. This is not a failure of planning or a matter of underinvestment. Nobody built it wrong. It is the permanent condition of putting 2,000 miles of open ocean between a population and the nearest spare transformer. And no amount of forecasting improvement, emergency management skill, or federal money changes it. Lala tested that condition at the lowest possible setting. 63,000 customers dark on one island from a Category 1 that never landed. Now consider what the same condition looks like when the storm does land. It has happened once in the modern record, and the state has spent 34 years not thinking about it. On September 11th, 1992, Hurricane Iniki came ashore on Kauai as a Category 4, with sustained winds of 145 miles per hour and measured gusts up to 227. 227 miles per hour is not a wind speed most structures have a meaningful relationship with. It is the number at which the question stops being how much damage a building takes and becomes whether the building is still in the location where it was built. The power on Kauai went out at 20 minutes past 1 in the afternoon. That minute is documented, and it is worth carrying because for much of the island, the lights did not come back for weeks, and full restoration took months. 6 people were killed and more than 100 were injured. One of the 6 was a National Guardsman, and he did not die in the storm. He died afterward, during the cleanup, when his truck overturned as he swerved to avoid live-downed power lines. He was killed doing the work of putting the island back together, which is its own quiet argument about where the danger actually lives on an island after a hurricane. Roughly 70% of the homes and businesses on Kauai were damaged or destroyed. 14,350 homes on Kauai alone, more than 560 on Oahu and 32 on the Big Island, from a storm whose center never went near either. The total came to about $3 billion, which at the time made Iniki the third costliest natural disaster in the history of the United States. And roughly 12,000 people ended up in public shelters, on an island whose population was then around 50,000. Take a moment with that ratio. Roughly 1 in every 4 people on Kauai was sleeping in a shelter. That is the ceiling. Not a model, not a projection, a thing that already happened to a real island inside the lifetime of most people reading a weather forecast today. And it happened to the smallest and least populated of the main islands, which raises the question that the state has never fully answered. The FEMA Hawaii Catastrophic Hurricane Plan estimates that roughly 420,000 people would seek public shelter in a major hurricane. That is the planning figure. Not a worst case, a planning figure. The statewide shelter roster is built around approximately 50 individual buildings at public schools. Those two numbers are not in the same universe, and the gap is not a secret the state is keeping. Officials have said it out loud on the record. We don't have hurricane shelters across the state. We just don't have enough to shelter everyone. It gets narrower than that. None of the designated hurricane refuge areas on Oahu, the island where most of the state's population lives, are built to withstand the strongest hurricanes. A refuge area is a place inside a public building that has been assessed as safer than a house. Safer is not the same as rated. In a Category 4, a great many of those rooms are simply better odds, not protection. The reason this matters so much comes down to what people would be leaving. There are roughly 187,000 wooden homes across the state, and many thousands of them are single-wall construction, a building style particular to Hawaii, in which a single layer of vertical boards serves as both the outside wall and the inside wall. No studs, no sheathing, one layer. Single-wall homes are precisely the housing type that emergency managers tell people to evacuate rather than shelter in, which means the plan for a large share of the state's residents is to go somewhere else, into a system with roughly 50 buildings in it. Then there's the thing that arrives after the wind stops, which is hunger. Between 85 and 90% of Hawaii's food is imported. Not most of it, nearly all of it. Commercial food stocks on hand across the islands support the resident population, plus the visitors, for approximately 5 to 7 days. Fresh produce runs out sooner, no more than about 10 days in practice, much less. Almost all of that freight enters through one place. Honolulu Harbor handles roughly 1.1 million tons of food products a year, which works out to something on the order of 3,000 tons a day, every day, to keep shelves stocked across the entire chain. There is no alternate harbor in the islands capable of absorbing freight at that magnitude if Honolulu goes down. So the sequence in a genuine major hurricane is not complicated to imagine. The port takes damage or simply closes for weather. The airfields close. The grid on at least one island fails, which means refrigeration fails, which means whatever food was in the system starts spoiling on day 1 rather than day 5. And the resupply that would fix all of it has to cross 2,000 miles of ocean and then find a functioning place to dock. The mainland version of this problem is solved by trucks. There are no trucks. There's only the ocean and a schedule. Here is the part that does not appear in any hurricane plan, and it may be the most consequential thing about Hawaii's next major storm. The state is losing people. Hawaii's population has declined in 5 of the past 6 years, falling by nearly 22,500 since 2020. In fiscal 2025, the Census Bureau counted 8,876 people who left Hawaii for somewhere else in the United States, and the outflow has been running above 10,000 a year with real consistency. The statewide median home price passed $1.1 million in March of 2026. By cost of living index, Hawaii is now the most expensive state in the country. And researchers at the University of Hawaii have been clear that the driver is not only high prices, but low incomes measured against them, compounded by isolation, a limited housing supply, and a narrow set of industries to work in. Nobody is leaving Hawaii because of hurricanes. They are leaving because they cannot afford to stay. But the effect on a disaster is the same either way. The people who leave a place because it is too expensive are disproportionately the working-age people who would otherwise be the ones stringing the wire, driving the truck, staffing the shelter, and rebuilding the house. A state that quietly sheds 10,000 of them a year is a state whose ability to absorb a catastrophe is thinning while its exposure holds steady. And the exposure is not holding steady, exactly. No AA's outlook for the 2026 Central and Eastern Pacific season put the odds of an above-normal season at 70%. Central Pacific storm activity tends to rise in El Niño years because warmer water and weaker shear let systems survive the long crossing toward the islands instead of dying on the way. And Iniki itself formed during the El Niño of 1991 and 92. The Pacific is running an accelerating El Niño right now. Further out, a high-resolution modeling study published in Nature Climate Change projected an increase in tropical cyclone frequency around the Hawaiian Islands late in this century, with storm frequency near Hawaii roughly doubling at about 2 degrees Celsius of warming. That is a projection about the 2070s onward, not a forecast for next season. And it should be held as exactly that, none of which means the state is doomed. Direct hits remain genuinely rare. Most storms weaken or turn, and Lala did both. Building codes have been strengthened since 1992. The state publishes hurricane strengthening guidance for single-family homes, and bills requiring stronger construction were moving through the legislature as recently as February of this year. Hawaii is not helpless. What Hawaii is floored by its geography. Warnings can improve. Codes can improve. Response can improve. The ocean between the islands and the nearest spare transformer cannot. That is what a Category 1 that never came ashore was able to demonstrate in about 18 hours. 2 houses gone down a gulch, 43 inches of rain, 1 death, and 63,000 customers sitting in the dark on an island nobody could drive to. The forecast was right. The warnings went out, the guard deployed, everything worked, and it happened anyway. That is not a story about a storm that got lucky. That is the floor. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Documentaries like this one take a lot of research and a lot of care to put together, and it means a great deal that you gave it your time. If you found it worthwhile, a like, a comment, or a subscribe genuinely helps more than you'd think. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.